experiment, a new program we're calling Curiosity Live. As that name suggests, for the next hour, I will be live here in the studio, and I've got some topics and guests lined up that I hope will satisfy and rouse your curiosity. Tonight, we will hear about the secrets hiding beneath the streets of Boston from the man whose job it is to find them, and we'll hear about some of the words capturing the zeitgeist this summer. We're streaming live on Facebook, and most importantly, the phone lines are open. Me and the guests want to hear from you. It's Curiosity Live. Stick with us.
I'm David Harper with the BBC News. The United States is formally withdrawing on Friday from a treaty banning intermediate-range nuclear missiles, prompting fears of a new arms race. The US has accused Russia of breaching the terms of the 30-year-old Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, by developing a new short-range missile. Here's James Landale.
The US and NATO say Russia has breached the terms of the INF treaty for some years by deploying a new type of cruise missile, something Moscow denies. In February, President Trump said the US would withdraw from the treaty today unless Moscow came back into compliance. Russia has instead suspended its obligations to the agreement. The collapse of the treaty has raised fears of a new arms race between the US, Russia and China. It also marks the end of yet another part of the international rules-based order.
South Korea has confirmed Pentagon reports that North Korea has engaged in a new missile launch, the third such action within a week. President Trump said he was not too concerned. Laura Bicker reports from Seoul.
The president said that it was very standard, that these were short-range missiles, that they have no agreement on that. It does seem that when Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump met, they only agreed, and certainly Kim Jong-un seems to have only pledged not to test fire intercontinental ballistic missiles, long-range missiles and nuclear weapons. So it does seem that Washington is attempting to brush off these short-range missile tests.
Saudi Arabia has announced a new law that will allow women to travel abroad without a male guardian's permission, ending a restriction that has been a symbol of the kingdom's ultra-conservative rule. Saudi women over the age of 21 will be able to apply for a passport, giving them the same travel rights as men. The traditions of male guardianship are to be further eroded, with women being given more family rights, including the authority to register births and deaths. Libya's Interior Minister, Fathi Bashara, has announced plans to shut down 3 of the country's largest migrant detention centres at Misrata, Tajura and Homs. The decision comes after calls from the UN last month for the centres to be dismantled. Yusuf Taha reports.
The Libyan Interior Minister, Fathi Bashara, said the centers to be closed are in Misrata, Tajura and Al-Khoms. Organizations that monitor the situation in Libya fear that the closures may lead to the remaining migrant centers in the country becoming even more overcrowded. There is also criticism that some displaced people are being returned to the Tajura detention center, which had been emptied after it was hit by a missile in July. The center is also close to fighting between the UN-backed government in Tripoli and the militia known as the Libyan National Army, which has vowed to take the capital for its Benghazi-based warlord, General Khalifa Haftar.
Yusuf Taha reporting. World News from the BBC.
From the WGBH Radio Newsroom in Boston, I'm Mark Hers with the local stories we're following. The co-chairs of the state legislature's Transportation Committee say documents they received show that notice of lapses at the Registry of Motor Vehicles were not heeded. And Senator Joseph Boncour and Representative William Strauss tell WGBH News they want to know how far up in the Baker administration's chain of command that notice went.
Certain people saw it and certain people said they didn't see it. But for them to identify it as a public safety issue, putting lives in peril, and for no action to be taken is just negligent.
And I would add, even if the information didn't go beyond the Registry of Motor Vehicles, it should have.
Boncour and Strauss say the committee intends to find out who in the Baker administration outside the RMV knew about the agency's failure to process thousands of out-of-state driving infractions. The first woman to lead the U.S. Naval War College since its founding in 1884 is now on the job. Rear Admiral Shoshana Chatfield became the Newport, Rhode Island School's 57th president today. Chatfield is a helicopter pilot who previously led a military command in Guam. She succeeds Rear Admiral Jeffrey Harley, who was reassigned amid reports that he was under investigation for possible misconduct. Dozens of shark sightings were recorded around Cape Cod and the islands last month. That's according to the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy's Sharktivity app. Dozens of beaches along the coast were closed last month because of sightings, and sightings are expected to increase this month as we enter peak season for shark activity. Right now in baseball, Tampa Bay leading the Red Sox 5-3 in the top of the sixth. In the forecast for tomorrow, sunny with highs in the mid-80s, and both days of the weekend are looking pretty sunny right now with highs in the 80s. And up next on WGBH, it's Curiosity Live.
Right, it's not up next, Mark. It is happening now. Thanks to everybody who noticed our proof of concept that we are live by noting that the mic stayed live. We promised a live show, and that's what you're getting. Mark, I do need you down here in this other studio. You are slated to be one of the first guests on the show.
That's right. Well, I'll be with you in a minute.
Thank you, thank you. In the meantime, let us get our bearings. It is Thursday, August 1st, 2019. For those of you who are wondering, we are now officially 58.356% of the way through the year. So, it's melting away fast. Deadheads of New England, you might want to raise a glass or maybe a bowl. It was on this date in 1942 that Jerry Garcia was born. And just to give you a sense of the scope of culture here in New England, Iron Maiden is playing right now in Mansfield, Massachusetts, and the National Youth Orchestra is playing in Tanglewood, doing a program of Berlioz and Strauss. It is almost a new moon tonight, 1% of the moon visible, so it is a good night to be out there doing some stargazing if the clouds are not in your way. And we're going to start now by talking a little bit about what news has been happening this evening with our crack night news team here at WGBH. You just heard Mark Herz, GBH reporter and editor. Hey, Mark.
Hey.
And we're also joined by Tori Bedford and Anna Kussmer, both Nightside reporters here
Happy
at WGBH.
to be here. Hey, Edgar.
So what's popping in the world this evening, everybody?
Well, probably you just heard in my newscast, a pretty serious thing that's been going on for a while now and just seems to keep escalating is the problems at the Registry of Motor Vehicles. And in addition to, that we talked earlier to these co-chairs on the Transportation Committee that just had a 7-hour hearing and are still digging through and are going to be investigating more. Tori was digging into some news about the thing that started all this, which is the horrible crash last month in New Hampshire, where a guy whose Massachusetts license should have been pulled by the RMV and wasn't, crashed into a bunch of motorcyclists and killed 7.
Right. So he had a DUI in Connecticut back in March of last year, and that was what should have suspended his license in this state, but that was ultimately revealed to be one of thousands of licenses that should have been suspended that the RMV had neglected when they, around the same time, started a new computer system that they are partially blaming for just not putting any of the information into the system. So today we submitted a FOIA request, a public records request, to look at some federal reports, the inspection reports. And what we learned today, the latest kind of development, is that Vladimir Zhukovsky apparently during the crash tested positive for narcotics, and he was reaching across to the passenger side for a drink when he crossed the double yellow line, and that's when he crashed into a group of motorcyclists in New Hampshire, and he killed 7 people and injured 3 others.
So it sort of sounds like what we've learned is that it not only was a person who should not have been driving because their license should have been suspended, but also shouldn't have been driving even if they had a license.
Right. And I'll just put my editor hat on for a second and say we should say allegedly killed.
Right, yes, yeah. Allegedly. Well, they died. But we also we learned today, so I was poring over these records, and I feel like I have a lot more questions about it having looked at these, because he had a lengthy record, but there were 24 violations on his record, but at least 14 of them were from the crash. So it's hard to know what came before that, although he did have, obviously, the DUI arrest from him.
So is the rest of your night basically poring over these records and trying to comb through it and understand what we've learned?
And trying to look at, we looked at the company profile. I tried to call the number that was associated with the owner of the company. Someone picked up and hesitated for a long time and then said, you have the wrong number, and then proceeded to not pick up again. So I don't know if it actually is the owner of the company.
So suffice it to stay tuned. You guys are going to be working on this through the night.
Yes.
I suspect we'll hear more about this in the morning and the weeks to come, because as you said, Mark, this seems to be something that, like, as we're unpeeling the layers, there's going to be much more of a story here.
Well, Secretary of Transportation Stephanie Pollack, who is head of the RMV, ultimately use the metaphor picking up rocks and finding out what's underneath them. So
I think it's also worth, you mentioned the testimony. They don't have a lot of the information that the RMV was meant to provide to that Joint Committee on Transportation. They still don't have all of the records and data and remaining documents that they had asked for. And so they will have to later give more testimonies based on those. So yeah, it's going to be a while before we have all the details.
Anna, what are you working on?
So, how was your July, Edgar?
I felt like I had a fine July. I mean, it was hot.
Yeah, it was hot, right?
Yeah.
So
sure.
not
Summer.
only was July hot in Boston, July was the hottest July on record in Boston, and it was actually the city's hottest month since meteorological data was ever recorded in the city in 1872. So it was a really hot month, and while hot summer months are common in Boston, this was record-breaking heat. 12 days of the month hit or surpassed 90 degrees. So yeah, it was a hot one.
So what's the sort of takeaway from that? Is it just we had a hot July? I mean, is there is there anything more to it?
One thing that's interesting to about this month was it wasn't just that we had peak really hot days.
Yeah.
The nights were really hot, and that's actually what pushed the month over the edge. And hot nights, while it might not seem that bad, because you might be talking about 85 degrees, that doesn't seem that bad. But during a heat wave, a hot night can be pretty dangerous, actually.
Yeah.
Because cool nights are really essential for vulnerable people who are suffering from heat during the day. That's a really important time for the body to cool down and find relief. And it can actually be a pretty serious health issue. And
also, you're maybe going to run the air conditioner at night if it's hotter at night, right?
Yes. Another thing is the grid. It really puts a lot of pressure on the grid. So the grid felt a lot this month. I talked to some members of the New England Grid Association, and they said they got some real peaks of the year. So yeah, it was a lot of pressure on the grid.
Hot girl summer.
And a lot of pressure on the grid. And is there anything that portends? Is it sort of? Do we expect? We hear a lot of people making predictions and projections about, how the climate will slowly change over time. Are we going to be expecting more of these kind of hot-nighted Julys? I mean, do we expect one in August?
Is there going to be hot nights?
Yeah, it's not bad out there tonight. But
climate change is an interesting question because while you can't say climate change caused a really hot summer,
sure.
What we can say, and there was actually a recent study from the Union of Concerned Scientists that looked into how climate change will impact urban heat in Boston. And right now, average Boston summer has about 11 days of 90-degree plus temperatures. But this report found that if we go on the current trajectory, the climate trajectory, we could have 41 days of 90 plus temperatures in 2050 and 69 days of 100 plus temperatures by 2100. So it just goes to show that urban heat is absolutely impact of climate change, and if it's nothing is done about climate change, what we felt this month, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we could be feeling. I shouldn't be evoking icebergs right now.
Or you should be, because we just talked about having
it's not going to be a frame of
July.
reference that we can use anymore.
Well, keep your eagle eye on August, and we'll check in at the end of August and see how we did.
Hopefully we'll get some relief.
Summer time in Boston means that there's kind of stories about fishing and water, and even though it's not really a summertime thing, Mark, you were telling me earlier there's been some developments when it comes to lobster.
Yeah, our environment reporter Craig Lamolt is reporting that we're incrementally moving towards having whatever choice you want of your locally caught lobsters. It used to be you could only get a whole lobster if it was a Massachusetts lobster. Then in 2013...
When you say you can only get, you mean that it was only legal in Massachusetts to buy a lobster that was caught in Massachusetts if it was a whole lobster?
Right, yeah. There was laws about how the lobstermen, I know there isn't a better term,
lobster people.
The people
Lobster
catching
people.
the lobsters. There's certainly women involved.
Thank you, Tori.
That once they brought it ashore, there were laws about how they could process it, and Then it was lobster tails were okay, not just the whole lobster, and now lobster claws too.
Do we know anything about whether or not I'm still going to have to spend $25 on a lobster roll?
Oh, I wouldn't think that would change.
Okay.
25. I'm spending like 30 on a lobster roll. Or are you getting 25 lobster roll?
I don't eat lobster, so I'm fine here. All right, thanks the WGBH Night News team for stopping by. Mark Hurst, Tori Bedford, and Anna Kussmer. You guys got to get back to work. You're still on the clock for a few
sure.
hours.
Good
All
evening.
right, thanks for stopping in.
Thank you very much.
So, here is a short, random, and exceedingly incomplete list of things that Boston Common has been used for in the past 385 years. Boston Common has been the place in town to graze your cows. It has been an area that's been chosen to execute heretics and criminals. It's been the spot to set a world record by simultaneously lighting 30,128 jack-o'-lanterns. And of course, who can forget when it hosted the Great Water Celebration of 1848, when more than 100,000 citizens gathered as a long-awaited, reliable public source of fresh water for the city of Boston debuted. Well, tonight, as it has been every summer for about a quarter century now, Boston Common is temporarily transformed into our own version of London's famed Globe Theatre, as Commonwealth Shakespeare Company presents Shakespeare on the Common. Our reporter, who you just heard about, Craig Lamalt, is live down on the Common at that performance. Craig, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me, Edgar?
I can hear you. What is going on?
It is a beautiful night here on the Common. Absolutely gorgeous night. We got, I don't know, it's got to be like 1,000 people sitting out on their blankets and their chairs, and they're watching the play Cymbeline, which is the performance for this summer is Cymbeline, and it's going strong right now. We're about an hour into it.
Craig, Cymbeline, even for more than casual Shakespeare fans, might also sound a little bit obscure. It's not exactly Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet. You don't really do Cymbeline when you learn Shakespeare in school. What is Cymbeline?
Yeah, I got to admit, this is one I totally don't know. I was an English major, never read Cymbeline. But I'll tell you, about an hour in, here's the deal. Cymbeline, the main character, the title character anyway, is the king. His first wife died. He's married to a wicked queen. There's like a whole Disney thing that kind of runs throughout this whole play, I'd say.
Yeah.
The wicked queen wants Cymbeline's daughter to marry her son, who's sort of this creepy dude. He's kind of a loser. But Imogen, the daughter, has married to this other guy named Posthumus. He's sort of a regular guy. But the king doesn't like that, has him banished. So he goes off to Rome, and he winds up bragging about his wife, who he's not with, to this buddy who says, hey, I could totally seduce her. And he's like, no, you can't. You can't seduce her at all. He says, no, I totally can. So they have this bet about whether they can do that. So his friend Giacomo goes, and he basically lies and says he has seduced her, but he hasn't.
How are you keeping all of these characters? You just said you've never heard of the play, and you've got every character's name just rolling off your tongue. I'm very impressed.
I'm basically paying more attention than I ordinarily would. I'll say that. The performance has been great. It's a really, really good show.
Nice. So I assume you've been out and about talking with people, finding out what's going on down there, who's been, deciding to spend their evening taking in a little bit of Shakespeare. Have you heard anything interesting?
I did. I talked to a bunch of people before the show began, and here are some of the folks that I talked to.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm from Rhode Island.
I'm Annie, and I'm from Wales.
Did you come all the way for Wales for this show?
No. No, but we're in Boston today, so we decided to come and check it out.
But being from the UK, do you have really high standards for Shakespeare for performances?
I'm not really sure, but I was saying to Nicholas earlier, about their accents, and I was waiting to see what they sound like, so I'll be judging that.
Do you know the play Cymbeline at all?
No, I've never even heard of it until today.
We got a Commonwealth Shakespeare Company merchandise tent here. Can you tell me what's for sale?
So we've got a lot of CSC merch. You've got Cymbeline specific shirts. You've got CSC sweatshirts. You've got baseball tees. You've got, for onesies. Very small children, you've got onesies with quotes on them. You got hats. You got mugs. You got cold cups. You got buttons and koozies. I think that's everything. But
that's a pretty good selection. So there's a T-shirt here that has a quote from the show, which is "Fear no more. the heat of the sun, which I would think actually over the last couple of weeks being here for the show probably seemed pretty apt.
Yeah, very accurate. It's been quite warm, so.
We're lucky to be in a tent today.
Hi, my name is Lucius, and this is our truck, Porchetta truck. We're penny packers. We're from Magoon Square in Somerville.
Nice. What are you serving tonight?
Tonight we have porchetta, which is slowly roasted Italian pork, and we're also serving a fried chicken sandwich.
So how are Shakespeare customers compared to other customers?
they seem to be a little more passionate about their food.
This is a crowd of foodies.
It's a crowd of foodies, definitely. They know what they like. They're not afraid, and they know exactly what they want. So it's a good crowd.
My name is Joe. I'm from the north end of Boston.
Have you come here to the Shakespeare in the Park before?
I have not, but I'm hoping I understand it because I never understood it in high school, so I'm praying I understand it now.
My name is Aria. I'm an apprentice with the Commonwealth Shakespeare Company this summer, so we're working front of house and facilitating and performing some monologues while we're at it.
Performing monologues just for the guests?
Yeah, so we will go up to a group, and it's a kind of a fun bet we have. So we'll say, we bet you can't name a play that one of us apprentices doesn't know a monologue from. So it really gets them thinking, and they get to pick the play that we do a monologue from, which is super fun.
Macbeth.
I do not have one, but
What do you got? What do you got?
I have Richard III.
Let's hear.
All right. Foul devil, for God's sake, hence and trouble us not, for thou hast made the happy earth thy hell, filled it with cursing cries and deep exclaims. If thou delight to view thy heinous deeds, behold this pattern of thy butcheries. Oh, gentlemen, see dead Henry's wounds open their congealed mouth.
Edgar, that's Aria Saltini, the world's most talented usher. She went on
She
for
was
a
ready
while
for
after
you.
that.
She
It was great.
That is amazing. So, Craig, final
Yeah.
thoughts from a beautiful night down on the Common.
I will say to anybody who's never actually been to Shakespeare on the Common before, it is one of the great things about Boston, certainly in the summertime, and it is not to be missed. And I'm going to go have some of that porchetta right now.
All right, Craig Lamalt, WGBH reporter, thanks for checking in with us here on Curiosity Live. You know, you have through the weekend to catch Shakespeare on the Common. All right, now that we know what is happening on Boston Common, it is time to turn our attention to what is going on beneath it. Can you dig that? My next guest already has. This is Curiosity Live.
I'm Joe Matthew. Tomorrow on WGBH's Morning Edition, the NFL may be the ultimate goal for aspiring football players. But in Worcester, an arena football team is offering a chance for players to chase the dream or stay in a sport they love.
The young guys who are trying to make it, and then you got the guys who have already been there and just love the game and want to keep playing until they can't play anymore.
We'll have that story and all the day's news beginning with WGBH's Early Edition at 4:50 a.m. only on 89.7 WGBH or on the WGBH app.
Support for WGBH comes from you and Emerson College, shaping society through creative expression and daring ideas, where independent minds move the world forward. Emerson College, become a creative force. And the law firm of Davis, Malm, and DeAugustine, PC, committed to knowing your business, not just the law. DavisMalm.com. DavisMalm.com.
B. Herwick III. I'm Edgar. This is Curiosity Live. We are live in the studio here on WGBH Radio. Now, you can say what you want to about Boston's famed dig, and there has plenty been said about it, good, bad, and ugly. But even though ground did not break until the 90s, the planning began in 1982, and I think it was in 1983 that the city of Boston established their archaeology program. This is not a coincidence. The Big Dig quietly proved to be a big boon for archaeology in the city, and ever since that early 80s, there has been a Boston city archaeologist, and joining me now in the studio is the current city archaeologist, which is probably the coolest job I've ever heard of, Joe Bagley. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. So, folks, we're going to chat with Joe for a little bit here. And as I said, we're live and the phone lines are open. So if you have questions for Joe Bagley, try to keep them to archaeology, but you can ask him about himself. We are at 877-301-8970. That is 877-301-8970. You can check us out on Facebook Live. We're monitoring things there, so you can comment there or ask some questions. You can also get me on Twitter at Herwick III. And for the brave among you, if you want to call and ask a question, you can also participate in some trivia. I have some archaeologically related trivia for you if you want to play some trivia tonight. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
All right. So we were just talking about there's hundreds of people sitting on Boston Common. And before this week, the last time I saw you was actually when you were doing a dig there. So talk to us about what's going on beneath all of these people.
Yeah, so Boston Common is one of the most undeveloped places in all of Boston. So for an archaeologist, it's kind of like sacred ground to us because we have so many options there that we don't have in other places of the city. One of the challenges in Boston is how many times places have been developed, where in Boston Common, it's never been developed. So we can really go pretty far back into history. In fact, the best thing about it is the Native American artifacts that we can find on Boston Common tell us quite a bit about the Massachusetts people here in Boston. And that's been kind of the biggest surprise of the Common, has been kind of just how far back its story goes.
So what kinds of things do you find or have you found when you've dug up some of that sacred ground, as you call it?
Yeah, so there's been two fairly big surveys on Boston Common. The biggest one was the lighting project in '86, and that ended up finding probably the two most exciting things was the Native American occupation area near the Parkman Bandstand, and that's really exciting because it's one of the more recent sites from the Native American period that was here before Europeans arrived. So about the last 1,000 years before Europeans showed up in 1630. But remarkably, it's just below a Revolutionary War encampment. So it's one of those sites where within about a foot, you get about 1,000 years of history.
No kidding.
Yeah, so it's one of those sites where it's hard to dig because the two stories are so close to each other. But they're also some of the most significant stories about Boston's past.
So how do you know you found these sites when you say, there's two stories close to each other? How do you know you have found a story?
So for us, we really want to find artifacts that date to one time period and not to other time periods at the same time. And so we're basically stuff geeks. We study what plates look like for 400, 500 years. We look at what stone tools look like for 10,000 years. And so when we find something in the ground, we should know when it comes from, what it's for, and basically what its story already is. And then we piece those stories all together. So for us, that site's really exciting because there's a very thin lens of exclusively mid 18th century artifacts from the time period when the British were encamped on the Common. And then just below that, there's a little gap, and then there's a very thin lens of native artifacts, all from about 1,000 to 400 years based on stone tools and pottery types.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That is just wild.
Yeah, and it's all been sitting there for 400 to 1,000 years, untouched. Despite everything that's been going on in the Common, it's still there.
Do you sort of, when you walk past the Common or through it, are you like, I want to dig here, and I want to dig here, and I want to dig here? I mean, do you think that when you're walking anywhere in the city, or you like, what's below me? Like, are there places where you're like, God, I want to get under the ground there?
Yeah, there's a ton of places in Boston that I'd love to see underground. The parts that I tried to avoid looking at is all of the construction that happens. Like, I don't have a lot of review over them, and I just don't want to see things being lost. But yeah, Boston Common is definitely one of those places where there's so much still there. But there's so many places in the heart of Boston and the surrounding neighborhoods that have stories that we just haven't had a chance to explore yet. That they're everywhere. Yeah.
So you had recently, up until very recently, been doing the first ever dig in Boston's Chinatown, which in theory you were supposed to still be digging now, but you are no longer digging now. So tell us a little bit about this now no longer current dig.
So this is one of those projects where it's like, when walking around, where would you like to dig sort of things. That's how this project came up. I was at a talk and somebody asked where I'd love to dig, and I said I'd love to do Chinatown because no one's ever done Chinatown in Boston. And I met a historian, talked to the neighborhood, reached out to people that lived in the neighborhood, and we identified the site right next to the Chinatown gate. And for about a year, we've been planning for this dig, including all the background research on everybody who ever lived in the property, looking at the property itself, how it changed over time. It's on filled land. And then we get to the site and we start our dig about 3.5 weeks ago. And it seemed really exciting at first. We were starting to find artifacts. We were finding a lot of demolition debris, which we knew was coming.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of never ended. And it just kept getting deeper and deeper. And the demo kept going. And we were down about 6 feet and still finding plastic straws and tapes from the 1980s. And
So when you say you were finding artifacts, you were finding vintage 1980s artifacts.
Yeah, whenever somebody sees the artifacts that we dig up from the past, it seems like, oh, that's really cool stuff. It's old, it's interesting, and when it boils down to it, archaeology is the study of trash and what people leave behind. And so when you're digging the 1980s and 1990s artifacts that are coming up, when it really is trash, it feels a lot more realistic that what we're doing from the 1700s is just dealing with the things that people threw out. And it feels a little bit more on the nose when we're in the 1980s, where we're seeing stuff that really is what most people consider trash, but that's what we study.
What was the best piece of 1980s trash that you found on this dig?
By far, it was the tape of New Edition, self-titled 1984
Really?
New Edition tape, which I think is probably one of the most Boston artifacts we could have possibly found.
Yeah, absolutely. How did that end up in the trash? That seems like a violation in this
Yeah,
city.
well, I think in this case it was actually in the house, and the house itself was demolished, and it and many other things that were left behind in the house end up falling into the ground with the rest of the building that we had to dig through with sledgehammers. But
so you kept going down and down and down and still not hitting. What were you looking for specifically as you were going down and going like, it's still the 1980s, it's still the 1980s, it's still the 1980s?
Yeah, and this site, what we were hoping to find was it's the first neighborhood that we've been able to survey that had the presence of Chinese immigrants and Syrian immigrants in the 19th and 20th century. So for me, that was an exciting opportunity to see what's the stuff from those people that were there in Boston, and many of them still there today. It's just new data, new insights into what we can get from the artifacts that people leave behind. And then below that, we were expecting to find an Irish boarding house. We had about 30 people living in a very small home. And then before that, it was a single family house. So it's the change of the neighborhood over time from about 1984 to now. Then we didn't find it, basically. We expected it to be there. It's actually probably still down there. We got down about 6 feet, and then we found the water table. And once you get to the water table, you go any further, and the water just starts flowing in, and it's not safe. It's not sanitary for environmental concerns. What to do with that water to pump it out, and so we just had to call it off for now at least.
So that ultimately is that hitting the water table is ultimately what shut the dig down. You just couldn't keep going.
Yeah, we could keep going deeper. It was safe to go deeper. We just couldn't, from an engineering point of view, there was just no way to stop the water from flooding into the site. We weren't trying to dig a swimming pool in Chinatown. We were trying to find some history.
I'm talking with Joe Bagley, who is Boston's city archaeologist. You are listening to Curiosity Live. If you've got some questions for Joe, you want to ask him about stuff that he has found or what it is to be the city archaeologist here in Boston, give us a call. We are at 877-301-8970. That's 877-301-8970. Sounds like we're going to take a call right now. Jamie, I'm not sure where you're living. Jamie, are you there?
I'm here. I live in Situate, but I'm on the Cape right now.
Excellent. Jamie, thanks for joining us here on Curiosity Live.
Sure.
What do you got for us?
So I wasn't sure what to expect when I called in. I'm friends with Christina Quinn, and she told me I should call in and help her friend Edgar out.
So you've been strong-armed into this. So I appreciate that from my colleague Christina Quinn, and I appreciate you doing her bidding. So thanks for calling and listening. You got a question for Joe? I'm sure you can come up with a good question for the city archaeologist.
So was that New Edition tape, was it playable? And if so, is it now in your rotation on your Walkman?
I don't know if it's quite playable. The tape where it was meeting the exterior was in pretty rough shape, but the plastic itself was probably doing a pretty good job keeping it intact. But we can contact some people that know how to make these things playable. At least we know what's on it. We don't have to play it.
That's a good point. Yeah. Now, is it in the city collection?
But seriously.
Yeah. No, we did bring it back to our archaeology laboratory. So it's at our lab right now. It's about to get officially cataloged, entered into the our system with everything else. I think we're gonna have to add cassette tape to our catalog options because it doesn't exist right now. But we do have the plastic category, so that's already in existence. So yeah.
Nice, Jamie. You want to play a trivia question with us before you get going?
Sure. I was actually going to hopefully ask a serious question. I was going to ask Joe what the most surprising thing that he's found about a culture that he's been investigating and digging through the trash, what's the most interesting and surprising thing he's found based on what conceptions he has about that culture, and maybe that he found something different?
Oh, geez, that's a challenge. So I think for me, I'm always more surprised about kind of where we find stuff than anything. When we dig on 20th century sites, I'm not quite sure if we're even going to get anything, because I'm worried about things like, okay, well, you have trash collection, and so that's going to end up taking most of the stuff off of these sites. But so far, every site that we've dug, the two that come immediately to mind is the Chinatown site and the Malcolm X house in Roxbury. Those two sites ended up producing enormous amounts of stuff from the recent past, like within the past 50 years. And so for me getting on these sites, I'm not really expecting to see information about the communities that are living in the site from the very recent past. And so to me, that's the surprise, is finding stuff from 1985. And I just wouldn't have expected to, one, find anything, because I figured it would have been thrown out and brought out to the trash, but also to get something I didn't know about. So we had a dinosaur toy. That was really interesting. We had a hair pick from the 70s that is very highly associated with Afro-style hairstyle. So now we're starting to know, okay, so we have somebody living in the house in the 70s or 80s that has an afro. So these are kind of like insights into folks that are actually living in the house that we didn't know going into it. And it's within the time that we could actually ask people who lived in the house kind of what their lives were like. But for me, it's always a surprise to see kind of more stuff and more data than I would have expected from those time periods.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be super old to be super interesting.
No, we could do the archaeology of the trash can in this room. Yeah, but it just has to be stuff.
It just has to be trash.
It just has to be
just
stuff.
like, give me trash.
Yeah, give me trash. If we can find some garbage, then we can tell you a lot about people.
All right, Jamie, before I let you go, we'll give you a trivia question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so dinosaurs lived during the Mesozoic era, which was, 250 to 66 million years ago, something like that. So that era is divided into 3 periods. Can you name one of them? One of the 3 periods in the Mesozoic era.
Cenozoic doesn't sound very right. I was hoping these would be multiple choice, but I guess
How about I give you a hint?
I'm not that lucky.
I'll give you a hint. There's a movie in which they build a park.
Jurassic.
That is, there you go.
The
There
Jurassic
it is. Ding, ding, ding.
era.
Jurassic. And the other 2 would be. Do you know dinosaur stuff,
I don't know
Joe?
anything about dinosaurs,
That's
but I think I
amazing.
actually know this. I think it's Jurassic and Cretaceous.
Cretaceous,
Oh, wow.
Jurassic, and Triassic is the third.
Yeah, that's my geology class from BU about 10 years ago that helped out with that.
All right, Joe, we got another caller. Who's calling, Bill? Bill, we got somebody on the air?
Greta's calling.
Greta from Cape Cod. All right, Greta from Cape Cod, you are on Curiosity Live. What do you got for us?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I have a question for Joe, because I'm actually very much into digging up old trash myself, but it's more like a hobby than a career. I wanted to ask Joe if he's ever dug a privy hole, and I also wanted to comment that New Edition album is one of my most favorite albums ever, and I would have been extremely excited to find that on a site. So I was just wondering, about digging old privy holes.
Greta.
And what you found.
Greta, that's amazing. So let's take a step back. Joe, can you explain to listeners who don't know what a privy is?
So a privy is a old outhouse.
Giant bathroom, just
Giant
a big old bathroom.
Big hole in the ground where people went to the bathroom. Yep. Yeah, and they are also what we look for as a historical archaeologist. It's the gold mine of information. So I've actually had the pleasure of digging one perfectly intact privy right behind Old North Church at the Washington Garden site. It had been heavily disturbed by a wall, but the area that we were able to find was maybe about 2 foot by 3 foot by 2 foot, and within that small area, we found over 8,000 artifacts.
What kinds of artifacts? Like what kinds of things do you
everything.
find in an old bathroom?
It's basically all of it's a place where you use a bathroom, so you get all of the human waste. So you can use your imagination as to what I mean. But that also includes seeds from all the food they're eating, parasites from the stuff that's living in their guts, and then on top of that, it's a smelly hole in the backyard. So it's a nice place to throw things out. And so again, since we were looking for trash, you go to the privy, and then so we have all of the dishes from the house. It looks like this house got cleaned out twice by 2 different families. We have 2 different deposits from 2 different families from 2 different socioeconomic classes. We have 2 different stories going on. So we have all of their dishes, all of their lighting devices, some of their clothing, all the food that they were eating, all the animals, bones that they threw into the privy. And it's just a gold mine of information. We're still studying that about a year and a half after we dug it up.
It also kind of strikes me, it's like you sort of, when you think about history, you have the written record, and when people are being interviewed or whatever for the written record, they know they're being interviewed for some sort of record, right? So they're going to hedge their bets a little bit to a certain extent about their story.
Yep.
But like, if you want to get the truth,
yeah,
you go to the bathroom, right? Like in the bathroom, like there's no, like obviously, like that's where people are throwing stuff that they don't want anyone to know about.
And nobody in their right mind expected somebody was going to dig these places up 200-300 years later, and sometimes I don't blame them. But the realities are, like, it's the unwhitewashed raw data from the past. So you can write in your journal every single day, I never have a drink in my life, and then you dig the outhouse and you find 47 wine bottles, and it's like, well, the stuff you left behind is telling us a different story. So let's look at that history that's written down, question it, and see what the archaeology can tell us about that person or that family.
You are listening to Curiosity Live. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. We're speaking with Joe Bagley, who is the Boston City archaeologist. If you want to ask him a question, he's going to be with us for just a few more minutes. We are at 877-301-8970. That is 877-301-8970. Joe, a couple of times you mentioned the collection and your cataloging and stuff. So where does all of this stuff that you find go?
Sure.
And is there any way for us to see it if we want to see some of this stuff?
Yeah, so we have a lab out in West Roxbury in the southwest corner of Boston, where we have about 2,000 boxes of artifacts going back to the 1970s from digs back then. Probably around 2 million artifacts that have been dug up over time, and the core of that
2 million.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Don't think whole plates, think broken pieces of everything.
Okay.
But it's all part of the core of it's the big dig collection from the 70s and 80s, and then we kind of have been adding on to it since then. But one of the more exciting things that we're doing now is we're digitizing that data. So we have these old paper catalogs from the 70s that are encoded in a way that even an archaeologist can barely read. So we're now photographing all of our artifacts, putting that information online. We are putting all of our catalogs online, all of our reports online, and basically going completely digital so that we can actually, for the first time ever, be able to, one, in our own lab, see what some of these artifacts are, because they live in boxes most of the time. But we also want the public to be able to know what we actually have, because we have some amazing stuff, and it tells a really cool story. And I want to make sure that this stuff becomes more accessible, but also it gets incorporated into more exhibits and into other places. We've just opened up a pretty decent exhibit at the Dillaway Thomas House in Roxbury. Of a lot of artifacts from our collection that was designed by by DCR. It's one of those places where, like, you walk around knowing there's so much stuff that has never really seen the light of day since it's been dug up. But there's cool stuff, and I want people to be able to experience it.
Give me a quick. I know it's probably one of those things where I can never just pick one, but give me like a handful of some of your favorites in the collection, just some of the great stuff.
We have a bowling ball from the 1600s that shows that Puritans were legally bowling in Boston, even though they were supposed to be very pious and very calm. We've got a dog that appears to have been ritually buried under the front steps of a tavern. We've got parasites. We've got seeds from people from the 1600s. We've got John Winthrop's foundation stones. We have millstones from Mill Pond. We've got we have an entire brothel that from the 1840s from the North End that was dug up as part of the Big Dig that has everything you can possibly imagine and then some.
Wow.
From it, thousands of artifacts that just recently got the research on it has been completed by Jay Lewis from BU, and it's just one of those collections that you open up any box and it's all intact. Everything's there. You can smell the history. There's medicine bottles that still have oils from plants that have a very strong odor that stink up half of our lab that you can still smell when you walk through. We have a shipwreck from the Seaport shipwreck. We have pieces of that boat, and we're in the archives building, and most people don't know we're there, and we want more people to know that we have this resource. It's basically a library of stuff.
Unbelievable. All right, rapid fire here. Rapid fire question. We got 3 of them for you coming at you right for the end here. All right, best part about your job?
I don't know what I'm going to do each month, day, most times. Yeah, or what I'm going to find.
Worst part about your job?
The weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weirdest part about your job?
Oh boy. Weirdest part about my job is probably that's a hard one.
You dig bathrooms.
Well,
you dig up old
but that's
bathrooms.
the most interesting part of my job too.
Yeah, but it's weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
okay,
super
the
weird.
smells. The smells.
There you go. All right, Joe Bagley is the Boston City archaeologist. We got to let him go. We're now going to move on from digging through the ages in the dirt to paging through old texts in a uniquely 21st century way. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. You're with Curiosity Live.
Trusted, local news. I'm Bob C. While billions are being invested in modernizing the T, it will take at least 2 to 3 years before commuters see any real results. And the question is, can we and the business community wait that long?
If you look over in the South Boston waterfront, there's about 20 private bus shuttles that are running around. Companies started shuttling employees on their own dime.
WGBH Radio, Boston's local NPR.
Funding for our programs comes from you and Northeastern University, where experience powers learning and discovery across its global university system of partners and campuses. In Boston and everywhere innovation happens. northeastern.edu/experience. And Cityside Subaru on Route 60 in Belmont, where the Subaru Summer All-Wheel Drive Away event is underway, featuring the full lineup of Subaru all-wheel drive vehicles. CitysideSubaru.com. The beauty of all-wheel drive. The beauty of summer.
I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. This is Curiosity Live. Thanks to everybody who called in while we were talking to Joe Bagley. Now, if you're anything like I am, you get into things. I sort of go through these phases where I just get into things. When you get into things, you want to learn all about them. One of the things I've been into in my life is Ernest Hemingway, and he had this quote that has always stuck with me, where he's sort of knocking fellow author William Faulkner, and he says, poor Faulkner, does he really think big emotions come from big words? He thinks I don't know the $10 words. I know them all right, but there are older and simpler and better words, and those are the ones I use. And that idea of older words really sort of changed the way I think about words. We were just talking to an archaeologist, and in a way, our next guest is an archaeologist of words and uncovering the layers and the stories that they tell through time. So please welcome to the program Peter Sokolowski, who is an editor for Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Yes, actual people still help make actual dictionaries. How you doing, Peter?
Yes, they do. It's great to hear your voice.
Great to hear from you, Peter. Peter is joining us live from New England Public Radio Studios. You are out in Springfield. That's where Merriam-Webster is based, right?
Yeah, I'm a mile from my office. Merriam-Webster has been in Springfield since 1831, and we're still here.
So what do you do for Merriam-Webster, Peter? What does it mean to sort of do your job and be a dictionary man in 2019?
Right, we're called editors. There's a fancy word which is lexicographer. Lexicographer means a person who edits and compiles a dictionary. We call ourselves editors because we function as a part of the publishing industry, and we sort of, identify with other publishers in kind of the same ways. But a dictionary editor, really the job is revision. And revision is a kind of a big term. What it means is that the dictionary, obviously, it exists. It's there. We know that, the recent edition is already in print, but we have to keep it up to date. So we have to, first of all, find new words and add those to the dictionary. We have to add new senses of existing words to the dictionary. And then we have to continue to revise and correct and refine what the dictionary presents, which is, really a challenging full-time job. I mean, to work all day, every day on the language is the only way to monitor the way it changes, because the language always changes.
Of course, it is 2019, Peter, and it strikes me that the job that you do now is sort of changing and happening faster than ever before. And it's probably a double-edged sword, which is to say that, people aren't necessarily, when they're using words or they're looking for words, going to a book on a shelf. Everything's happening online, but that means you can kind of take a look at what's happening.
Yeah, it does. You're exactly right. I actually have a pretty good reason to believe that dictionaries are being more used now than ever, because most of us are carrying a dictionary in our pocket now. It could be an app, it could be just the mobile browser on your phone, but certainly the dictionary online, I think, is maybe the best expression of the dictionary. There was a long time when I was nostalgic, like a lot of people, for the print dictionary, and I love print dictionaries, by the way. But there's so much more that we can do. The problem with print was that we were so limited in terms of space. And now we can expand those definitions, expand the etymologies, and notably add things like audio, which is a huge revolution in dictionary publishing, to actually have the word pronounced out loud for a person's reference. We also have videos online and so many articles. So it really kind of allows the digital expression allows us to expand our coverage of the language. There's something else too. There's some fun things you can do. For example, when you think about it, alphabetical order is arbitrary. You know, the fact that certain words begin with an A or a B or a C is an arbitrary thing. But chronological order of the dictionary is not arbitrary, because words enter the language according to human events and human progress and technological developments. So we can have, you have a button at Merriam-Webster.com, you look up a word and go down to the bottom of the page, there'll be the date, that's the date of the first use of that word in English. And then there's a feature called Time Traveler. You can click on Time Traveler and it will reorder the dictionary into chronological order.
That is so cool.
Yeah, so that you can follow year by year which words entered in. And if you go to the 1840s, you'll find words about steam engines and locomotives and railways. If you go back to the late 1500s, you'll see all the new Latin words coming in from the Renaissance, the new ideas of science. If you go up to the 1980s and 90s, you'll see personal computer terms. You know, so you could really follow the trends of the culture through the language, because the language is a map of the culture.
You know, Peter, we don't have too much time left. I know one of the other things you're able to track is what words people are looking up, and you have learned over the years that this tells you something about what's going on in the moment.
Absolutely. You know, this is fascinating. You know, there have been English language monolingual dictionaries for about 400 years. And for most of that time, there was no way for a dictionary maker to know what a dictionary user actually did with the book and which words were being looked up. And then we put our dictionary online in 1996, and we saw a list of words that was sort of static, kind of looked like SAT study list. But then something happened that changed the way that we do our jobs to this day, and that was the first news story that was widely shared online. It was the death of Princess Diana. And we immediately saw all of the words shift, that the words that went to the top of the list were news-related words like paparazzi, which was the cause of her death. The word cortege, which was for her funeral. And that's a funny word. It's a modern French spelling. It's got a French pronunciation. But here's the interesting thing, and the one that really, you know, kind of keeps me eager to go to work every day. The most looked up word was the word princess itself, which you might think, boy, that's an easy word. It's not hard for most adults to spell.
Yeah, it's like, why are people looking up a word they
exactly.
already know?
And here's what we've learned over the years. We're good at reading data. We're not good at reading minds. You never know what word will trigger the curiosity of the public. But in this case, I would guess that, for example, in the case of paparazzi, it really is a spelling issue. Are there two P's? Are there two R's? You know, what's the singular? I think every newsroom in the country was looking that word up. But a word like princess, I think the reason isn't lexical. It's not about the word. It's about the phenomenon. It's an encyclopedic question. For example, are you born a princess? Does a princess automatically become a queen? Is a princess higher than a duchess? There are all kinds of questions that you can answer based on the definition in a dictionary.
So what have people been looking up this summer? I mean, can you see right now, do you kind of have a sense of a few words that have been like really piquing the imagination of the public?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we do have, right on the homepage, you scroll down, you can see the top words of the past 24 hours, the past 7 days, and then for all time. The all-time list is a huge list, because we're getting, you know, 1.25 billion page views in any given year. So it's a lot of data that comes in. But you can see that there are clearly political terms. In this past 24-hour period, the words patriot, malarkey, and exonerate all show that people are really thinking and paying attention to politics and the sort of primaries. Even though we're so far out from any kind of voting or election, the word malarkey was a huge spike in our data, and it's probably the 5th or 6th time that it spiked as a result of Joe Biden's own use of that word, which began back in the 1980s. We looked back into the archives and found out that this is just a pet word that he has, that he uses. He used it in a debate with Paul Ryan in 2012, and it spiked our data. He used it in a debate in 2016, and he used it last night as well. So it's an interesting way to kind of mark the news events and kind of view the news through the prism of vocabulary. It doesn't mean this is the most important word in the story. It's the word that sent the most people to the dictionary.
Do you have a sense, in the time that you've had the dictionary going and being able to see this kind of data online, what is the most looked up word of all time?
Oh, that's an interesting question. You know, right now our all-time list has what I call evergreen words that have nothing to do with the news or the calendar. You know, there are words for Valentine's Day and Thanksgiving, Christmas that we see on a kind of cyclical basis. The top words tend to be abstract words with classical roots, words like pragmatic and integrity. And those two words are in the top 10 or 12 right now. But the top two words in our all-time list right now are fascism and socialism. And that's really kind of poignant and interesting because it proves a couple of things. It proves that people are paying attention to the news. It proves that words matter, that when you throw around a word that might be an epithet or it might be an accusation, it might be a diagnosis of some kind from some source, people check it out. They look it up. They want to see what it really means. A word like socialism is really tough because this is a word that when, even 20 years ago could never have been identified as a word that would be used in American presidential politics. And here we are in 2019, and it is. And so that's a really interesting shift in the culture, and the shift is, again, reflected in the language.
Peter Sokolowski, editor for Merriam-Webster Dictionary in Springfield. Thanks for joining us on Curiosity Live.
It's great to be with you.
Speaking of words, each week... Still live. And speaking of words, each week we're going to end our hour together with a few words from an area writer read by a listener. Tonight we turn to 20th century fiction author John Cheever. Cheever was born in Quincy in 1912. Known as the Chekhov of the suburbs, he wrote often about mid-century, middle-class suburban life, and a number of his stories set in and around the South Shore. Now, he's primarily known for his short stories, for which he won a Pulitzer Prize in 1979. But tonight we have a passage from Bullet Park, which is one of his 4 novels, read for us by Cambridge listener Hannah Katzen.
We travel by plane oftener than not, and yet the spirit of our country seems to have remained a country of railroads. You wake in a Pullman bedroom at 3 a.m. in a city the name of which you do not know and may never discover. A man stands on the platform with a child on his shoulders. They are waving goodbye to some traveler. But what is the child doing up so late? And why is the man crying? On a siding beside the platform, there is a lighted dining car where a waiter sits alone at a table, adding up his accounts. Beyond this is a water tower, and beyond this is a well-lighted and empty street. Then you think happily that this is your country. Unique, mysterious, and vast.
John Cheever died from cancer in 1982. He is buried at the First Parish Cemetery in Norwell. If you have a favorite poem or passage from a Massachusetts writer, historic or contemporary, doesn't matter to me, or if you want to throw your hat in the ring to read one for us on a future episode, let me know. Email me at curiositydesk@wgbh.org or find me on Twitter at EBHerwick3. For now, we got to get out of here. Kara Miller is up next with Innovation Hub. My thanks to the team that made Curiosity Live possible tonight. Aaron Schachter directed. We were produced by Rachel Rock. Thanks as well to our big technical brains behind the scene, Gary, Miles, Mark, and of course, Bill, our engineer. And thanks to Kate Zachary, our news director, and of course, Phil Rado, who is the biggest of all kahunas at WGBH Radio. Any final thoughts, Bill?
You're going to have to wait.
All right. Well, a big thanks to you for spending some time with me. We will be back at it here on Curiosity Live in just 167 short hours. That is next Thursday at 9 p.m. Until then, I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. Stay curious out there.